Hey, it's Amy from Create Magic at Work. We all have parts of ourselves and experiences that once felt unwelcome, unsafe to express, or deeply misunderstood. So we buried them. We're about to go treasure hunting in the places you were taught to avoid. This episode is part of a special mini-series called Finding Treasures in the Trash, hosted by executive coach and creator of Inner Truth Work, Cari Jacobs-Crovetto. Cari brings decades of corporate leadership and deep spiritual practice to guide high-achieving, soul-seeking humans through the process of reclaiming the parts of themselves they've cast aside. Through raw conversations and profound truth work, each episode invites you to turn toward what you've disowned and begin integrating it back into the whole, beautiful human that you are. Because your treasure doesn't always live in the light. Sometimes it's buried in the trash. Grab your gloves, Cari lead the way. Let's dig through this trash. Hey everyone, Amy here. And today I get to introduce you to something brand new and incredibly special on Create Magic at Work. We are launching a brand new mini-series called Finding Treasures in the Trash, hosted by the incredible Cari Jacobs-Crovetto. And over the next 11 months, Cari is going to guide us through a powerful journey of transformation. One that starts not in our strengths or our highlight reels, but in the parts of ourselves we may have disowned, ignored, or labeled as too much. We're going to hear raw, honest conversations with guests who've walked through loss, grief, burnout, reinvention, and came out the other side with something sacred. And at the end of every episode, Cari's going to guide us through a short practice to help us integrate what we've heard. This is not self-help fluff. This is inner truth work. And I can't wait for you to meet the woman who's leading us through it. Cari, thank you for bringing Finding Treasures in the Trash to Create Magic at Work. I'm just so grateful that these amazing humans and an amazing human such as yourself is bringing this conversation to the Create Magic at Work community and the listeners. So thank you.
Wow, Amy, what an introduction. It's always so beautiful to hear your own work reflected back to you. And I'm so excited to be here today to kick this off with you.
I mean, we have been behind the scenes kind of iterating this for a while. I mean, this is all you. And as you take everyone through this 11-month journey of finding treasures in the trash, before each month everyone gets this special piece of this series, I would love for you to share your backstory with everyone so they can learn a little bit about you and who their teacher and coach will be throughout the next year for finding treasures in the trash. So tell us a little bit about who you are and where you've come from and why you think we can find treasure in trash. And what does that mean? And we'll get into what that means.
What does that even mean? Yeah. It's such a big question. Really my story is one of both self-reclamation as well as dissolving of self. And I'll start kind of at the beginning because that's where it started for me. So I was born in the 60s. I was born almost 2 months early. And in those times, they didn't really cover your eyes. They sort of stuck you in an incubator and crossed their fingers and hoped, I'm oversimplifying it, of course, but, it really was a much simpler time in terms of preemie and preemie care. And so I ended up having severe damage to my cornea. My cornea is in both eyes, so much so that I was almost legally blind. I couldn't see at all. And it was not discovered until I was about 5.5, 6 years old. So I went through the first 5 years of my life really not being able to see. Everything looked like I was, when you open your eyes underwater, that was pretty much what I saw. And so I created this really strong connection to my sixth sense. And I remember the day that my grandfather, who happened to be an eye surgeon, which is just hilarious, right? That, it's like the cobbler has no, what is it? The shoe cobbler has no shoes. Um, no one in my family figured out that I couldn't see, even though my grandfather was an eye surgeon. And when they finally got the idea that they should check my eyes, and they put these crazy, like 1960s white cat eye glasses on me at like 5.5 years old. And I turned and I looked and saw my mother's face for the first time, like in crystal clear vision. I had two responses. And I remember, this is like one of those life moments, where you just like, there's no doubt that the memory is clear and right. I remember looking at the beauty of her face and feeling all at once the joy of seeing her, but also feeling like the whole world contracted. And suddenly I was seeing through like these two eyes versus like seeing with this part of myself that up until that point had been living in more of an awakened awareness space, really. So, I'll pause there. That was sort of in the bookmarks of how I came to be and where I am now in my life. I think it sort of set my soul's course in many ways, that I was going to come into this world as someone who was innately feeling at a sense that had just been heightened, more heightened than maybe most.
And looking back on that, it's so interesting. Obviously, those of us that believe in divine timing and in the beauty of the universe believe that that was meant to be for you. It was an awareness of your spiritual gifts and how you can reconnect with those with your physical sense of sight being restored. You kind of are an edge walker, which we talk about a lot on Create Magic Work, where you were able to connect all of these different realms together and like bridge them together. And I think it's so interesting that you're doing this with our trash now, like with the finding treasures in the trash. That's going to be a beautiful experience for everyone listening. But more about you, so everyone understands who their leader is in this journey. Tell us about your corporate success and also how your spirituality plays into that as well in your life.
Yeah. So I would be remiss to not skip a major chapter before my corporate success, which is that I was also, a lot of what I talk about is soul level work or soul transformation at work, soul transformation in life. And so in addition to not having sight and having this really big sixth sense, I was also born into a family where my mom was bipolar, borderline personality disorder. She, back then, again, in the early 70s at this point, when you went to the doctor and you were a depressed woman, unfortunately, they pretty much had one protocol, and that was to put you on Valium. And so she was put on opioids when she was about 25 years old, and she stayed on an addict until the day she died. And this was, we were a upper middle class family. We were privileged, and, she was an addict. And this was something that, she often attempted suicide. She was obsessed with death. She was obsessed with dying and going to the other side. And so in addition to, to sort of this initial challenge of not being able to see, I had a second and a third challenge, which is that my mom there was a constant threat of abandonment. And my father really didn't know how to handle it. And so he became like a rageaholic, very angry, I think angry that his life turned out the way that it did. And so there really wasn't a safe space. Now, we'll fast forward into the question about my corporate life, because I think had I been a sort of shy, quiet child that had a natural grace to me, maybe I would have navigated this all differently. But I wasn't that. I was a bubbly, fiery, extroverted child, and I grew up to be a fiery, extroverted, passionate woman. And by the time I entered the corporate world, I had a lot to work out. And much of it I worked out at work, Or at least I started there because I wanted so much to be a good leader, to create different kinds of environments than what my parents had created for me. But rather than, sort of contract around what I didn't have, what I began to do was dive into it more deeply. And that kind of became, I guess, the core of how I began to work and heal myself. You asked about where the spirituality started. So when I was 22, I was starting my first job. I started having panic attacks. And this was at a time there was no internet. There were really no books on anxiety. There were no anti-anxietals. And all this makes sense when you look at the course of my life, right? A lot of what happens oftentimes with panic and anxiety, we don't talk about this enough today, is that this is big, big emotion, big, big pain, big, big fear that's coming up that we suppress. And it literally creates a biochemical response in the body. And so I had this pretty challenging life. I was entering the workforce and I started having these debilitating panic attacks. And my way through that, they had offered to put me on Valium. And of course, no way was I going to repeat the patterns of my mom. And so I just naturally started this practice of what I called looking at rainbows. Looking at rainbows can feel a little woo-woo. And partially, I named it that because I was so young when I started the practice. The first time that I found this practice, I remember feeling so much panic and anxiety and having been to emergency room after emergency room and everyone telling me there was nothing wrong with me. And so I just laid down on the ground and I began to feel myself drop and drop into the center of the earth. And I just followed my own intuition to keep dropping. And I closed my eyes and it got darker and darker and deeper and deeper. And as I did this, I could feel first my muscles relax and my body start to begin to relax down into the ground. And eventually what I would come to know is my vagus nerve relaxed. And the panic, while still there, began to morph. And I would have visions, I would have dreams as I dropped and dropped down further and further into my body. And these dreams would often include things like rainbows or beautiful places I had been. I was creating my own biofeedback loop in some ways. And this would be the beginning of a practice for me of dropping into the present moment, of dropping into myself, of dropping into the world of integration and shadow, of inner truth, so that I could begin to integrate all the parts of myself that were living in great fear.
Yeah, amazing. So your life story is incredible. You're actually writing a book that is going into a lot of it. It's like the edgy eat, pray, love before that was even a thing, I feel like. Where you went on this
It's like the shadowy eat, pray, love.
Yeah, there you go. The shadowy eat, pray, love. I want to share just a little piece about that journey with everybody.
Yeah. So it really does tell this part of the story that I shared with you now, but it really dives into a lot of more meta-analysis around all those different points in my life where I had a choice. And the choice was really clear. I could either disown, suppress, disregard, lean other directions away from the parts of myself that were really, really hurt and damaged and traumatized. And what the panic attacks did for me, I think, is it gave me no choice to do that. And so I learned to lean in. And I learned to lean into every part of myself where there was resistance, because for me, when I didn't, I would feel anxiety and panic in my body. So it was like I had no choice, right? And I didn't want to be medicated. It was just a choice I made. And so I learned, and this is what the book is really about. It's a collection of different moments and stories. I call it a prescriptive memoir. So there's a collection of different moments and stories from my life where I could have had a choice to stay contracted, stay away from my pain, or I could lean into it. And the more that I leaned into it, using a combination of meditation and therapeutic practices of all kinds, some psychedelic practice, everything, really, everything was on the table for me. And the more that I leaned in, the more that I found freedom and release, the more I found my authentic voice, the more I found that I healed. And so that's really the story of the book.
Hence finding treasures in the trash for everyone here, right? And I'm curious, what do you think would have been the outcome if you didn't lean in?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm not sure I would have survived, to be honest. I think maybe I would have eventually just, once medication started coming out for anxiety and panic attack, I probably would have medicated to survive, or I certainly don't think that I would have had the success that I had. And I can talk about that. I ended up having a 30-year career in marketing. I was a chief marketing officer, and in 2019, I was named in the top 50 chief marketing officers in the world by Forbes magazine for groundbreaking innovation. I was creative and passionate, and I had that intuition working for me, so I could sort of have a lot of foresight into what consumers were going to do and how they were going to behave and how they were going to. So that made me great. But all of the emotional stuff, what I call in executive coaching, the being parts of our job. So how I showed up, how I managed interpersonal communications, how I managed conflict, how I managed getting what I want. I wasn't so great at those parts because I didn't have a lot of great role models. And so I don't think I would have had that career if I hadn't leaned in. I shared earlier that I wasn't born with a personality that was, is naturally sort of kumbaya focused. I'm not a smooth sailor. I'm very much a firecracker. And so when you combine all that, and I feel like, you started off by asking me, do we come in with some of this predetermined? I don't know. But what I do know is that it sure would have been easier if I was mellower. And that's not what I was given. And so now you've got this like combination, right? Somebody had a really tough life, but who's kind of a firecracker. And that can blow up in flames, right? The fire kind of hits the paper and bam. And so I don't think I would have been able to get as far as I did without doing this work.
So for finding treasures in the trash, part of your work and what you have trademarked as inner truth work, tell us what that's about. How does inner truth work relate to finding treasures in the trash? And how do we know if we're ready for this type of digging?
Right. Because it is digging, right? I think I'll answer your first question. Like, what is it? So I had a predominant training track, which was Buddhist-based meditation. I picked up Buddhist books when I was 15 and started reading about it then and started practicing in my late 20s. And now I've done, I'm close to 60 years old. And I spent a lifetime sitting, probably almost 7,000 hours of silence in a variety of retreats, including 3 months of silence in India. And that really became the backbone of what I work with now. And when we think of meditation, I think the kind of common parlance around it today is like you do it to de-stress or you do it to relax, right? Because we're inundated these days in ways we've never been inundated before. Like there's always a phone in our hand or AirPods in our ears to hear our messages or, we never unplug. And so it makes sense that the world population went to meditation as a way to stress release. And in a way, that's kind of like my looking at rainbows, right? But the real purpose of meditation, in the way that I understand it, is twofold. First, it's to really discover what it means to connect with awakened awareness, which is a state that exists at all times. It's literally like an electric plug. It's on all the time. It's playing in our background. We have a birthright to connect to it. But most of the time, we unplug the plug at around 2 or 3 years old. And many of us never plug it back in, or we might plug it back in when we're doing a run or there's a big moment in our life and we happen to like plug back into awakened awareness. But oftentimes people are just living in the construct of their mind and in the story of their life, and they forget that there's this vibrancy that exists all around us all the time. So the first piece is plugging back in to that source. The second piece is once you do that, there's a clarity at which you can really look at yourself. And you can begin to see these areas that you've disowned, pieces of yourself that are sitting in resistance to whatever the thing is. Could be resistance to an emotion, resistance to an experience. And inner truth work is about leaning in all the way into those places of resistance to find out what's on the other side.
Yeah. I like how you shared your philosophy on meditation, because I do feel like it's sort of the pop culture recommend for anybody that's going through anything at the moment. And I think half the people recommending it aren't even doing it themselves. I'm being such a brat right now. But like, I just feel like it's kind of the like cookie cutter, like, oh, something's wrong. Like you're stressed out. Go meditate, go breathe. And the way that you're sharing the deeper piece behind what you're doing and what you're calling meditation, I think is really helpful for everyone. And I also want to call out that for everyone listening, in the series, Finding Treasure in the Trash, Cari, you plan on part of the episodes in the mini series, you're going to lead them through your way of connecting in that way, correct?
Correct. So each episode, I'll do sort of a little, 10 to 15 minute talk. I will either interview a guest or I'll elongate a talk. And then at the end of that, we'll be doing a meditation together. And the idea behind that is to really sit and cement in what was shared in the podcast in a different way, where we're plugging into that awakened awareness. And so we're not hearing it just from the mind, but we're really hearing it from this vibrant clarity, a place where we can take it into our body and our mind and our soul in a deeper way.
That's so important. And I honor you for doing that, because a lot of us, those of us, I should say, that see coaches, therapists, friends, and we're verbal processing maybe something we're going through. And, all these words come out. There has to be, and these episodes of this miniseries are going to be so powerful for everyone. There has to be a space to cleanse the energy of what has been verbally processed. You can't just have these beautiful conversations, especially about finding treasures in the trash, and then kind of like walk away with leaving all of this there. So it's really going to help shift everyone listening in this it's almost like a magical ritual way that you're going to lead everyone through that. And I just think that's I just want to call that out for everyone that's going to be going through the experience for the next 11 episodes and next 11 months. You're going to be with us for a year.
So thank you for pointing that out, Amy, because the last thing, as I was thinking about doing a podcast, like the last thing I feel like we need is more stuff to cram into our minds. I mean, it is like crazy, right? But I really think people crave the sacred. Even when they don't know it, they crave the sacred. And our way of doing it is just like we handle craving food, right? We just keep putting things in our mouth, but we don't stop to actually allow ourselves to metabolize information. And so much of the work that I do and the work that I do with my private clients and the work that I do with my meditation students is about metabolizing it into the soul, metabolizing it into the somatic space, so that we can really tap into change, honestly. At the end of the day, for me, this was about becoming a good person. This was about trying hard not to push people the wrong way. I wanted to be loved. And probably it stemmed from a really big desire to be loved and liked. But it just so happened that in the process of trying to be loved and liked, I made it a whole lot easier for the people around me to love and like me. And I think fundamentally, it's kind of what we all want, is to be valued, to feel worthy, to feel abundant in love and in being liked.
Yeah. So a big part of finding treasures in the trash and the work that you do that you call inner truth work is about people realizing they've pushed parts of themselves away, maybe inside them, or maybe they're beginning to notice parts of themselves they've disowned. It's also a call to those of us that are feeling that flicker of recognition that we've disowned some parts of ourselves to maybe even be the people pleaser like you were talking about. It's a call to stop abandoning ourselves. So what would you say to everyone listening in this moment about what this is going to look like? What would you say to them? What would you offer to them?
You say something that's so important, Amy, which is sometimes we don't even know we've done it. We just know our life isn't working, right? Our relationships aren't working. We're not getting what we need. We don't feel like we're tapping into our potential. I mean, people come to me as executives or as leaders all the time, and they come because they don't understand, why they're having a conflict, for example, or why they're not able to leverage their team in some way. And it's a pretty short distance from that goal into opening up for people. Where is it that they've been resisting? Where is it that there's some pushback somewhere inside of them, some story they have that we need to unpack? So the first step is really just getting to the doorway of recognizing, wow, there's somewhere in my body where I just don't feel relief. I feel like there's some kind of pressure, some kind of resistance, some kind of pushing away. So it takes a while for some people come and they're ready. Other people, it takes us a while. And part of what this podcast will look at is those moments, right, when people realize they're in resistance to some parts of themselves or some experience of life. And in that, they disown or get rid of some piece or part because they can't stand the resistance. And so that's step one. And that is what I call a moment of truth, right? We're kind of lying to ourselves when we sit in resistance, but we're not actually aware that we're sitting in resistance to something. So that first moment of truth, that's like the moment we know we've got something to work with. That's super exciting, right? And then we can look at, sometimes it's going back to story of origin. Sometimes it's going back to trauma. Sometimes it's just looking like, okay, where can we start right here, right now? What's something that we can change in this moment about how you're relating to a piece of yourself that you've pushed away? Maybe it's because of shame.
That's what I was just thinking. It just hit me on a different level. The inner truth work is also about what you're believing to be true as well. And almost like we live in some truths that we're living that we don't even recognize. And so having someone like you as a coach and as a finding treasures in the trash, I mean, it can shine a light on that. That's like your shadow mandala, right? Where what I've believed this whole time isn't true. That's part of the inner truth work as well, right?
Yeah, I felt that in my entire body when you said that.
Yeah, I felt that when you were speaking, that realization that you can help, like, oh my gosh, what I thought was this is actually not. And it can open a door for me to live a much more joyful, abundant life. What about those of us that don't feel like digging in our trash? What if we're like, hey, I've got a great life. I feel great. I don't really feel like excavating anything at the moment. Is there something to those of us that don't want to find any treasure in our trash?
It's a very good question. If someone has a full life and feels joy and feels connected and feels deep meaning, I mean, I don't know if there's anything to do there. What I would say is oftentimes that's a front. And I think this inner truth work is also about confronting the front, right? My mantra to myself, and this is just something I've said to myself since I was probably in my early 30s, is continuously revealing the truth of who I am to myself. Like there's a little bit of an obsessive quality that I have about it, right? Like at every corner, I'm going to look for places where there's some disconnection. And that happens all the time. So I think even if somebody comes in and it's like, oh, I have this, I'm ready to look. I'm ready to look. We may find life is pretty good. What do you want? What are you looking for? But oftentimes if somebody has a sacred calling and there's just that tiny, teeny voice that says, am I really looking at it all? Right? Is there something here for me that could make me feel more joyful, more authentic, freer, more connected to my soul and my own journey, if that's the voice we're following? And we're kind of not taught not to follow that voice, right? We're taught to do. We are a doing culture. Another podcast, great. Another whatever, another book, let's just do. But this is a whole different way of relating to ourselves.
Yeah. What would you say to someone that feels like they're really sitting in the trash of their life right now? And they're like, I am not seeing any treasures. Maybe they're thinking, I believe that there was a rainbow I could look for. I'm not seeing it. I believe there could be something in this trash. I'm digging, nothing's coming up. And I feel sad and lost. And I'm in the trash. What would you say to someone that feels that way that's listening?
I taught a class on Monday night. I teach a Monday night meditation class here in Lafayette, California. And I was doing some research for the class this last Monday afternoon, and I came across an old teaching from a kind of spiritual saint at this point called Ram Dass. And the name of the teaching, it was a audio teaching, was called Eat It Like It Is. And I clicked it open because, of course, it was a catchy title. And it was Ram Dass. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And the teaching it was in the early 70s. And he was talking about his dad. And his dad was kind of just a normal guy from New Hampshire. And his dad used to have, his friends over and they would drink scotch or bourbon and play poker. And one of his dad's friends owned an Italian restaurant. He was this kind of gruff Italian guy. And Ram Dass was younger and he happened to be in the room, and he overheard another friend say to the Italian restaurant owner, your spaghetti needs more sauce. And the Italian restaurant owner said, you know what? Eat it like it is. And in that, Ram Dass had this spontaneous teaching come out of him, which is love it as it is. And he went on in this teaching to share that at that time in the world, you could almost carbon copy it to today. There was so much happening. There were wars happening. Ayatollah Khomeini was a big threat. There was children in Ethiopia and Africa were dying 1 every 2 seconds. How can you love even that as it is? So part of this is not, I do not teach, and if you know me, I'm not a particularly woo-woo teacher. This is not about covering stuff over. This is not about pretending that I can sit here in California in a nice home with all the privileges that I've been given and look out at the world and say, okay, everybody's trash should just be turned into a treasure. It's not about that. But it is about living a deeply human life. And even through the muck, even through the pain, there will always be a path to something, to some treasure, even if you can love it like it is that much harder. On the other side of it, I promise you there's something.
Amazing. I think you really just solidified what you want listeners to feel through this series. Truly, with that statement. Amazing. I want to use your magical gift of foresight with everything that you've experienced in your life. What can you sense but not yet see for everyone listening to Finding Treasure in the Trash over the next year?
I hope people will feel inspired to see their own inner truth, to find courage and bravery. The name of my company is Brave Directions, because this is not work for people lacking courage. It's hard work. But I do believe that when you put these practices and hear people's stories of how they've put these practices down in place, I'm hoping truly that it will be a soul calling for people to stop so much doing, to lean into being, and to really surfacing the parts of themselves that they're scared of or that make them uncomfortable, bring them back into the fold, metabolize, integrate them, and see what happens with their life.
Love it. And so, Cari, you're going to be bringing so many amazing, cool guests to the series as well, which is a huge resource for the Create Magic at Work listeners and community. Any final thoughts for finding treasures in the trash before we ask everyone to grab their gloves and take a dive with us?
We're going to go dumpster diving. You know, it's funny. I had a very treasured aunt. I write about her in my book. And she was highly destabilized by life and ended up, much like my mom, on drugs for different reasons. And she was living in the streets of San Francisco. And every holiday, we weren't sure if she was going to show up or not. But inevitably, the door would fly open and in would walk my aunt in some crazy outfit or like a big, huge purple velvet cape. And of course, I was like in my teens and I would say, Auntie, where'd you get that? And she'd said, you know what? I found it in the dumpster behind the Macy's in San Francisco in Union Square.
Love it. I just got the chills.
And so I kind of feel like I feel like, you never know what you're going to get. Maybe you'll get a big velvet purple cape, metaphorically, that will change your life.
Amazing. Cari, thank you for taking us into this experience for the next year. I'm so excited to see where we land in spring of 2026. And for everyone listening, stay tuned and follow along with Finding Treasures in the Trash. And my hope is that we all find an amazing treasure in our trash throughout this series.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm in complete gratitude to be in partnership with Create Magic at Work.
Thank you. It's going to be magical. Buckle up, everybody. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming back every week to listen to a new episode of Create Magic at Work and really helping to support and advocate for healthy leaders, workplaces, and lives for all of us. If you want any information on how to connect with me, click on the link in the show notes. You'll get access to all of the social media links for Create Magic at Work. Stay following along for more amazing episodes where we help you improve productivity and profitability in the workplace and decrease stress. Sending magic to everyone, and see you next time.